We'll step out of the way. So I'd like to start with Carla. We're all really excited to hear about a first-tier homocysteine screen. Can you give us a sense of the timeline for completing the pilot and what the timeline then would be for rolling this out to all 50 states? And we have Canadians here, so we need it in Canada. Any other country represented here? Well, we need it all over the world, but we know you're really responsible for the U.S. support. So, Carla?
Oh, that's such an easy question. For the pilot, I believe it's Wisconsin. So again, this may take some time. So I believe that maybe by the end of this year or so, going into next year, we still have to work through some details. So I know that you want some hard numbers right now, but we are still working with the state to find out what sort of timeline that they're working with. The big point, though, is that we are happy to work with them at whatever pace they are able to move things forward with. We're able to send our staff to help them to bring the test online as they need, but they do need to have a lot of their framework put together before that happens. The rest of the country, again, all of the states have a huge number of activities that they have in front of them. That's why I indicated that in terms of dissemination, we do have opportunity to teach them at our workshops that we have twice a year now. So there's going to be opportunity for them to get to know, to come in and train, and then to consider how they're going to implement. So I can't give you a hard date for that, but I do know that there's a recognition that there's a path forward.
Great. Thank you, Carla. And I have another newborn screening question for Greg. Can you give us a sense of the state of newborn screening for remethylation disorders and severe cobalamin disorders and severe MTHFR? Do there need to be improvements in that process, and what can we expect in the future?
Oh, okay. I guess even to address some of the things that Carla addressed, for a lot of the state challenges of bringing on anything, it depends on some of the things of if you own your instruments. Right now in Colorado, we lease our instruments. We have to use whatever kit's available if that's FDA cleared. So we lease it from a vendor. So that for implementation across all the states, it may vary based on if they have a mass spec or a method or anything else, or the instrumentation in their lab that allows them to even test that. So they may have to go out and buy a $300,000 mass spec to implement the new disorder. And then it becomes issues around blood spot space. So we get blood spots from hospitals. If that blood spot is used up, it becomes, we have to ask for another collection or anything else like that. So we run into collection issues sometimes with this. If we can multiplex tests, and that's what happens with the mass spec right now, is that one punch does 29 disorders. So when we add homocysteine or something else, that becomes another punch if it's not multiplexed into our current method. For Colorado, we're getting mass specs that we'll actually own. Before September 30th is when I have to have them in. So we will actually have a little more flexibility here for adding new disorders or adding any second-tier testing, but adding something with mass spec capability. So to answer your question, we'll have a greater ability to test and look at some of those after September, after we've started implementing those things. And then I'm going to go on one more thing. There was an FDA guidance put out on May 6th that has now looked at hampering some of our newborn screening testing because we have to have cleared FDA tests. A lot of newborn screening tests are laboratory developed, and the FDA has now come down and said that we are going to start to enforce what they feel is their guidance on doing that. So it may hamper what is moved forward that easily, that if it's not FDA cleared, legally we may not be able to test for it. So if there's not an FDA cleared test, and currently that's biotinidase, get SMA for us, and any second tier that we'd be bringing on would be laboratory developed. So we're not allowed to use that as how it's written as clinical value. So even doing that, it's still in the process of being reviewed, but it's going to be a hamper of bringing on some of this testing.
Carla's going to add on if you
No.
want to switch.
I'm just going to reiterate everything that Greg just said. It takes time. The states can't stop doing what they're doing, and they're already screening for homocystinuria. It's not the best because they're doing it with methionine right now, and some may have a second-tier test. So to be able to switch over to a new platform, they have to continue doing what they're doing, get the instruments, get the space, get the staff, bring the method on, do everything in addition to all of the other conditions that they have to bring on very quickly because everybody's watching and asking to be able to move forward. And yes, the FDA, our federal cousins, they have put up this guidance, this recommendation. It's not even a recommendation, it's something that we have to do. And it will slow things down. So as an agency, our branch is looking at how we're going to help support the states, but right now it's unclear because we still need guidance from FDA about how that's going to go.
Can I just add one little tidbit?
Go ahead, Danae.
Most states do test for combined methylmalonic acidemia with homocystinuria as the set of secondary conditions, because their tests with C3, which is on the newborn screen, again, it's not a great test for these conditions. So they're testing a different process right now, so there still needs to be advocacy either way. Homocysteine would, again, resolve this issue. I just want people to be aware of that, and there are a handful of states that do set low methionine cutoffs, because in remethylation disorders, they have low methionine. So some of those states will pick those patients up with remethylation disorders because they have that set, but the majority of states do not have a low cutoff.
Thank you, Danae. I now have a question for Matt. We're all thrilled to hear about the home monitoring that's coming. Can you give us a sense? I have no idea what home monitoring costs. I know, for blood glucose, it's pretty low, but that's been around a long time, and there's a lot of competitors. Should we have an expectation? I know you can't tell us what price you'll market it at because you'd get in trouble with your CEO, and you might not have figured it out yet. But just give us a sense. Should we be expecting something in the range of we all bought COVID tests for $20 a test when the government stopped giving it out for free? Or is it more like, I know I paid $200 to get plasma homocysteine measured in my lab that I did for an annual physical because I don't have the disease. I just want to know, as having two sisters who had it. Which price range should we be thinking about for home monitoring tests like this?
Insurance cover it.
And insurance. Wait, you need a microphone?
So Rob wants to answer this one. So our cost of goods for the meter is about $100. Our cost of goods for the test strip is about $1.50, and it depends on the licensing agreement with a potential partner, whether it's medical, food, or biopharma, what that markup will be, and whether or not we can go through channels of distribution that have already exist for the medical foods. So I would imagine the sale price of the meter to be about $300, and the test strip maybe $5 to $7 in that range. And we're looking into getting the CP codes established for the HCU as well.
For insurance?
For insurance, yes, reimbursement.
Good job.
Nice job, Matt.
Now, Matt tried to send his CEO up here, and he said, he may have to answer some real in-depth chemistry questions. I said, man, no one in this room has chemistry questions. That's not what we're here about. Okay, I have one last question on screening. I'm actually going to ask Kim, as a clinician and geneticist, to answer this, and that is, how should people affected by any of these homocysteinurias think about screening family members? And I'm assuming you've all screened and they don't have the actual disease, or you would know it, but could they be carriers, and how do they think about that when they're planning to have children? Oh, We're not going to make Kim walk over here. Sit down.
I can walk. It may not be elegant, but I can do this. Okay, so typically most of the disorders we're talking about here are autosomal recessive, in which having the disease means you have 2 changed copies. And in many cases, when you or your child was diagnosed with homocystinuria of any type, you received a genetic test that told you what the misspelling was. And there should be 2 differences. There's some exceptions. The cobalamin X's are a slight exception. And then I don't think anyone here has cobalamin C from the really rare types of cobalamin C, but there might be someone in here. So you guys have a slightly different answer. But the vast majority, it's autosomal recessive. And we know what the misspellings are in your family because the affected person hopefully has had genetic testing. And what you want to know is, am I a carrier for carrying this disorder if I don't have it? And so you can do carrier screening. And what this is just looking for the specific mutations that are within your family and whether or not you have one of the 2 mutations that your affected member can do it. In some cases, this is part of preconception carrier screening. So women are often approached as they start thinking about having children, getting this preconception genetic testing. So in some cases, that is going to be included within the preconception genetic testing. So why would you want to know? Well, one, you're going to want to know what your risk of having an affected child is if you yourself are not affected. If you are affected and you're thinking about having children, then you may want to know whether your partner is a carrier, because what you want to know is, no matter what your decisions during pregnancy are, is the person that I'm delivering affected, right? Or am I family members at risk of having this disorder? Because if they are, whether we're talking about severe MTHFR, cobalamin C, or the CBSs, that's the vast majority of folks here, or the other cobalamin disorders, then we can start therapy as soon as that infant is born. And starting therapy incredibly early actually improves outcomes. And so if you are a sibling or a family member and you don't know what your carrier place is. Now, we're also carriers for 9 to 15 disorders, just as a caveat. So you could be a carrier for many other things. But if you don't know what your carrier status is and you're really concerned as you start thinking about having children, or your family members start thinking about having children, then you can certainly get preconception genetic testing, or you can just figure out what your carrier frequency. Talk to your local geneticist or metabolist, and we actually have standard letters that says this person has a person impacted by this particular diagnosis. This is what their genetics are. This is where their misspellings are. And you can work with your doctor to make a decision about whether that's the right thing for you.
Thank you, Kim. And I'm just going to add on a few more things. I've gone through this for my family because I think you could tell from the videos, etc. I lost 2 sisters in the early 70s to classical HCU, but I'm fortunate to have 4 siblings alive. And so I decided, as I got more into this and figured out more about the disease, I decided to get all of us tested. When I wanted to have children, which was around 1990, I was trying to get pregnant, I was told at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that there was no really good test for it. I'd have to get hospitalized. I might never get insurance coverage. It would cost a lot of money. It's not covered by insurance. All good reasons not to do it. So I didn't do the testing. We just had our kids tested right away and celebrated their negative results with a champagne uncorking. So I then, as genetic testing improved, I looked into it again and decided, my kids were going to get to a childbearing age. They're both now engaged, and so hopefully that's not too soon after. But I then had my siblings and myself tested for carrier status. We did it through University of Colorado. I think it's Sally Stabler lab that does that. And we, by the time we were done, we used to call it a family bloodletting. They'd all meet at the same doctor in Buffalo, New York, where they all live, and send their samples in. By the time we were done, we then screened my mother's and father's siblings so we could go further and find out should their kids get tested. They were just doing a mucus sample. So I found out through that I'm not a carrier and my brother's not a carrier, but I have 3 sisters that are carriers. 7 children across those 3 sisters. I then offered to have them all tested. They recommend wait until they're old enough to be able to deal with the information. So the first one was tested when they were getting married and knew they wanted to have children. We've now tested 7 of them. Of the 7, 3 are carriers. 2 of the carriers, we tested the spouses, and when you test the spouse, you don't just look for the defects that you have, because if they have a different defect, you combine those 2 and you have the disease. And so I'm happy to tell you that when I started out, the first spouse I tested, I paid $1,200 for that test. I just tested the second spouse in December after my nephew got married. It was down to $200. And that's just huge improvement and efficiency. And so I had his wife go to Children's Hospital in Buffalo. The doctor I talked to there assigned one of the genetic counselors to talk to her so that she understood what she was getting tested for and what it all meant. Filled out the paperwork. They sent the test off to Invitae, but there's lots of different providers. Got the results within days, and fortunately both were negative. The third's not at a point in his life when he's ready to get married or have children, so we haven't done the 3rd testing yet. It gave great peace of mind to my niece and nephew to know that they didn't have to worry about their child having the disease. So if anyone has any questions on that, contact me. It really is important to know. Okay, so we're going to go on to a couple of questions I have for other speakers. I was told to pronounce the name Sagar, so here he is. Can you let people know, I don't think it was in your talk unless I got distracted if you said it, if they do not live near a center that's enrolling patients in the trial, is there a way to enroll remotely, and how do they go about doing that?
Thank you, Margie. Actually, I did skip over that part, so I appreciate you bringing that up. So in the U.S., we have, there are 2 options. There can be a site at a hospital, which we're calling brick and mortar sites, but then we also have a remote or virtual site for participants who don't live close to a major city or a major academic university that's running the trial. And so that's called Science 37. They have been doing a great job so far. We've been working with them, and they've helped enroll some participants. So the nice part about it is no matter where you live, if you're in the U.S. And you're interested in participating, potentially working through Science 37 in a remote site where a nurse will come to your home and the visits will be done at your home. Some tests you might have to do locally, like eye exams or testing for your bone mineral density, but the majority of tests will be done at home. Even for people who are coming to the clinic or sites, the majority of the visits are at home. So because it's twice a week dosing in the trial, a nurse will come to your home or a place of work to give that. And so we try to be as cognizant as possible with people's time and making sure they don't need to come to the hospital necessarily. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I now have a question for Ken. You teased the audience with saying that taurine had a positive effect and you could tell people how to take it because it's out there in different products. Can you give them a little bit more of that and tell them, if it's safe and is there any side effects they should watch for?
Okay. The one nice thing I can say about safe is that when you were born, your liver contained 100 times more taurine than you have now. no tablet's going to get you to that level, and your liver was fine. So it is about as non-toxic as you can get. All the gentlemen in this room, most of you have about 80 grams of taurine in you already. So, it's just a question of topping it up a bit. I would recommend you take 2 grams, which is like 2 tablets, 3 times a day. And it would make sense that you take it when you take your food. And I had a look at this just recently. You can buy a very good one called Nutricost on Amazon. It costs you about $10 a month at the most. So no wonder Big Pharma's not really interested. So, okay, but it is really safe.
A follow-up question, Danae, can you get the mic over to Mel?
I'm going to play like the person who's in charge of our insurance for our board and this meeting, and do not go and just take taurine without consulting your metabolic team.
Thank you, Danae.
Regardless of how safe it is, just because anytime you change your medication, they need to be aware.
Okay.
All right.
Good point. Mel?
This is for Ken.
Sorry? There was a couple, yeah. But that wasn't, I don't think that was from the taurine.
Is
So,
it
yeah.
a question for Ken?
This is regarding the taurine levels. My son's doctor, Dr. Shojiano, actually tested his level of taurine, and he said it's adequate. Mm-hmm. Does it mean that he doesn't need to take it, or would he benefit from extra, or how does it work?
Okay, I would say when a clinician tells you it's adequate based on the general population. Has he studied what it should be in a homocystinuria, or would more be beneficial? We did a controlled clinical trial with safety and efficacy, and it was perfectly fine, and it did fix the endothelial dysfunction. So I would personally, and actually the reason I know 6 grams a day is because I take it. It's actually, there have been a lot of studies recently. I didn't really want to get into this, but there's been a lot of studies recently looking at the metabolites that go down with age. And rodents and primates, they lose a lot of taurine as they get older, and if you supplement with that, they live longer. That's actually come out in Nature Communications about 6 months ago. And I just think that on the balance of probabilities, I think it's actually quite a healthy thing to take.
Okay.
Right?
Again, disclaimer, talk to your doctors and make sure your doctor has access to his publication, though, because maybe that would help inform. Irene, was there something you wanted to add on? No. Okay, great. Okay, I have a question for Irene. We have 5 minutes left. I think we should go over 5 minutes so I can let them ask a question. Oh, okay. A question for Irene. Irene, I know you talked about how the high-dose hydroxycobalamin, that the quality at different dispensing pharmacies is challenging. I believe I remember you had a list of dispensing pharmacies. So can you comment on if families don't have access to a source they're comfortable with, how do they get access to your list?
There is a list of compounding pharmacies we have circulated, and organic acid. I think it's on the website or not. Yeah. We can definitely add that list. The different states have different compounding pharmacies. It's very hard to get medications out of state or have it covered if it's out of state. So every clinic and every family has to work with their own state limitations. And there used to be that, the college pharmacy could ship out of state, and those things have been changing. And New York State has to have it all frozen and only give a supply for a certain amount of time. There is a changing landscape for compounding pharmacies, and there are shortages. Recently, we had this shortage of this 1 milligram per ml formulation. Yes, there is. It's not a perfect. We really need better compounding, more standardized formulation. Really, this is an urgent need because we do agonize one day that there will not be a source anymore, or the families cannot get it, and it's. Yeah, Kim can expand on access.
Many of you who have to take injected hydroxycobalamin of any concentration may have noted that your poor metabolic physicians are scrambling a lot. So there's a shortage of 1 milligram per mil. Nobody knows when that's going to get better. But that also means there's a shortage at the compounding pharmacies as well. I think we're now on pharmacy number 4 And different insurances will pay for different compounding pharmacies, or will not pay for the compounding at all, but will pay for the drug. So talk to your metabolic docs. And if the pharmacy you're getting your drug from says, oh no, we're out, let your metabolic docs know as soon as possible, because sometimes that's how we find out a pharmacy's run out of drug.
Let me put a challenge to Mary from University of Buffalo. Maybe you could do something and set up a compounding pharmacy.
There is a pharmacy in Georgia that has achieved Medicaid coverage, and they ship out of state. That is an evolving field, and we try to keep it up to date.
There's places you can get it.
Okay. I'm going to open up. We have time for one or two audience questions, and if not, I'll have one more for Brittany. Questions from the audience. We tried to anticipate what your questions would be.
Hi, are carriers always asymptomatic?
I mean, I can tell you, having carriers in my family, my younger sister had high homocysteine levels, and she had a stroke at age 48. But I will let Kim give the
official. So the official answer is not typically, but could carriers have elevated homocysteines? They certainly can under certain situations. Especially nitrous oxide, carriers don't process that very well. B12 deficiency, folate deficiency are all big triggers for carriers to be more likely to be symptomatic. In addition, homocysteine is an acute phase reactant, and so it goes up during illness, prior to MIs, all of those kinds of things. So you're actually at risk for it to not go down as well when you have an acute phase.
And I recommend to my family members who are carriers to get their homocysteine levels checked. And I know my older sister was also higher. Her doctor had her take B12, and it came down. So
yeah, so actually, if you're an internal medicine doctor, you're supposed to check total homocysteine and MMA to determine whether somebody's B12 deficient, not B12 levels.
And I can tell you, my insurance used to charge me $200 for the test. I just got my lab work done in May, and it was free. And my level was 13, so and I don't think I'm a carrier, but I still want to know. Danae, did you have something over there? Question?
So when you think of the carrier status, one question I had was kind of piggybacking off that last question. With like slightly elevated for a carrier homocysteine levels, is it common to also see, I know they were talking about methionine level cutoffs being dropped to 48. Is it common to see somebody of a carrier status that had both of those elevated slightly, saying methionine levels 52? Would that be a concern to think that could be HCU, even though you're tested?
Like in a newborn screen or something like that?
Maybe even an adult?
In an adult. In carrier screening, so if you're doing the biochemical stuff with carrier screening. Honestly, the first knee jerk is not CBS deficiency or a cobalamin processing difference or MTHFR. The first knee jerk is B12 deficiency. So B12 deficiency by far outweighs the numbers than any of the disorders we're talking about. Now, one of the questions is, and I'll propose this, so as many of you guys know, Dr. Baker, who was here yesterday, and several other folks are putting together a rare consortium bid to the NIH. And you may have also noticed, we sent out a questionnaire on REDCap 8 weeks ago. The reason that is to find out things that are interesting to you. So if you want us to gather data as part of a natural history study done as part of a rare disease consortia, let me know, because there's always been a conversation about whether we need to find out whether a carrier is more likely to have a stroke or whether a carrier is more likely to have elevated total homocysteines in the general population, or whether a carrier is more likely to have an autoimmune disease, or whether a carrier is more likely to have. The way they teach us in med school, carriers are not supposed to be symptomatic.
When Dr. Koch, when I was alive, he actually told my son that his level was 20. Total homocysteine level was 20, while his level was 12. So he used to say, like, how do you do this kind of thing? Because my husband's level was also around 18 or 19. So in my family also, there's a lot of levels around 20. So even though they are, I mean, only carriers or probably carriers, can the levels be so high? I mean, Dr. Koch was not a carrier, but his level was around 20.
So that's, but there's high and then there's high, right? Let's be honest. So those are abnormal if you consider the cutoff between 12 and 15 for total homocysteine, right? But if you are unlikely to have a thrombosis until you get to 120 to 150, right? Being right above that cutoff, are people going to treat that or not? I see that, I think, B12 deficiency before I think anything else. I mean, I see a 20, I think B12 deficiency before I think anything else, unless it's somebody I know has an underlying inborn error metabolism.
And I just wanted to actually, I learned a lot from following Kim around the world. And one of the things is women are much higher risk for B12 deficiency. There's a specific age Kim can, but just as we age in general, we are more likely to need more B12. So as an aging general population, you are at risk to be more likely to be B12 deficient, and then women even more so. So that's something just to take into consideration, is that it may have nothing to do with being a carrier. It could just be that you're an aging human.
I'm actually going to see if I can put on one of my slides, because it's going to help us here a second. All right.
She'll do it in her
I'll
talk.
do it in my talk. I'll talk about it in my talk. I'll talk about the folate sink in my talk for a second, because it becomes a little more understanding.
Kim gets to her talk, we're going to cut off the Q&A, get to any questions you didn't get answered, and we'll get them out. And now we're going to thank our presenters. Sorry we didn't get to you, Brittany.
While they are